All right, welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're really digging into a specific piece of source material. It's a YouTube video transcript, actually.
Okay.
It's titled Israel Hides Damage from Devastating Iranian Missile Attacks, and it's from the CJ Werleman Show.
Right. I'm familiar with the source.
So our mission today, just to be clear for everyone listening, isn't about saying if these claims are true or false.
No, absolutely not.
We're here to carefully unpack the narrative within this specific source. We want to understand the perspective it's offering on, recent events.
To understand its viewpoint. Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So what hits you right off the bat, I think, is how direct this source is with its emotions. It doesn't hold back.
Not at all. It opens with a really strong claim.
Yeah, saying Israel is desperately trying to downplay the devastating destruction that Iranian missiles have wrought upon the Zionist state. That's the exact wording.
And then it gets into the emotion explicitly.
It does. The narrator uses the word schadenfreude.
Which they define in the video, right?
Yep, as to take great pleasure from another person's misfortune. And goes on to say, hardly anything brought more joy than watching Israelis complain about being bombed.
Wow. So it's positioning the attacks immediately as deserved.
That's exactly how it's framed. Karmic justice or righteous vengeance, those are the terms used.
What's fascinating here is how the source immediately establishes its emotional and moral framework for understanding the events it describes.
It's not subtle.
No.
Yeah.
And this immediate embrace of such a strong emotion like schadenfreude, it's not just a personal comment,
Right.
It really signals the source's intent. It tells you this is less about objective reporting and more about creating this visceral emotional alignment, setting a very specific moral viewpoint right from the start. It kind of sets a deeply partisan tone for everything else.
So once it's laid out that strong emotional stance, it quickly moves to justify why it sees these attacks as justice.
Yeah, for those reasons.
What are some of those key justifications it puts forward?
Well, the video asserts that, and this is a direct quote again, 82% of Israelis celebrate the genocide that has taken place in their name for the past 21 months.
That's a huge claim about public opinion.
It is. And then it connects that to alleged outcomes, claiming the slaughter of upwards of 100,000 Palestinians, 75% of whom were women and children.
Okay, so specific numbers alleged there.
Very specific. And crucially, it puts the blame for the immediate conflict squarely on Israel, saying they started an unprovoked war against Iran.
And the allegations don't stop there. There's this really shocking description.
About the tourism.
Yeah, claiming Israelis turned this alleged genocide into a major tourism attraction.
Taking picnics and tail selfies, I think it says.
That's right. While Palestinians are, quote, incinerated and starved to death. These are incredibly provocative statements.
They really are. And that's where the source leans heavily into moral condemnation.
It feels less like reporting facts and more like building a case.
Exactly. These aren't just factual claims presented neutrally. They seem designed to dehumanize and delegitimize one side. It creates this stark moral divide.
Right.
The source isn't really presenting evidence in a balanced way. It's constructing a narrative where the attacks are seen as morally justified because of the alleged depravity of the other side.
So from those moral arguments, the narrative then shifts pretty sharply. It moves to the alleged physical impact of the attacks.
The effectiveness claims.
Right. It says definitively, Israeli cities are on fire. This is not Gaza. This is downtown Tel Aviv. And insists Israel is desperate to keep hidden the real scale of Iran's counterattack.
This raises an important question now.
Yeah.
How does the source use specific examples to back up these broader claims about the damage and Israeli vulnerability?
Good question. Where does it get specific?
Well, the video argues that Israel's much-vaunted Iron Dome air defense system completely failed against Iran's third wave of attack.
Completely failed. That sounds significant.
That's the claim, allowing Iranian missiles to move, quote, freely over Israeli airspace.
So the source isn't just claiming damage happened, but that a core part of Israel's defense was essentially useless in that instance.
Exactly.
What's the deeper point the source seems to be making by focusing on the Iron Dome's alleged failure like that?
Well, I think the insight here goes beyond just the physical destruction.
Okay.
By highlighting the Iron Dome's supposed vulnerability, the source is trying to dismantle a key symbol of Israel's perceived invincibility.
Undermining that image of strength.
Precisely. Suggesting its defense capabilities are actually much weaker than people think. This claim becomes a powerful symbol in their overall narrative of Israeli weakness and ultimately defeat.
And does it give specific examples of hits?
It does. It provides several. For instance, it says an Iranian missile completely destroyed a missile interceptor at Israel's Nevatim air base.
Okay, a specific military target.
Yes. And that's not the only one. The narrative then makes a pretty bold claim about a ballistic missile hitting Israel's equivalent of the Pentagon, the Ministry of Defense building.
Really? The MOD.
That's what the source asserts. And it adds that, quote, Zionist-controlled media outlets refuse to report this, but that Fox News, interestingly, did cover it.
That's quite specific about the media coverage, too. Any other locations mentioned?
Yeah, it also describes a devastating impact in Ramat Gan City, which is right on the edge of Tel Aviv.
Okay.
And it alleges that hypersonic missiles took out a major oil refinery depot in Haifa, the port city.
Hypersonic missiles.
That's the claim, with missiles slamming into Tel Aviv targets with relative ease, according to the source.
So a picture of widespread effective strikes hitting significant targets.
That's definitely the picture the source paints.
Okay, so we've covered the alleged physical impact, the damage claims, but the source goes further, right? It gets into another area.
Right.
Allegations of Israeli deception.
Yes, specifically about casualties.
What exactly does it claim there?
The source states very bluntly that Israel lies about anything and everything, and that includes casualty numbers from these attacks.
So not trusting the official figures at all.
Not at all. It claims that way more Israelis have been killed, with dozens, possibly hundreds or even thousands, buried or trapped beneath rubble.
Wow, hundreds or thousands potentially. That's a huge discrepancy from what's often reported.
It is. And then it draws this very direct, stark parallel.
To Gaza.
Exactly. Saying these Israelis now share a similar fate to more than 10,000 Palestinians who remain buried under the rubble of their own homes in Gaza.
That's a really specific and powerful comparison to make.
Extremely impactful rhetorically.
And then the source points out what it calls an irony.
Ah, yes. The spokesperson's comments.
Right. Netanyahu's spokesperson complaining about Israelis being targeted while asleep. The source contrasts that with its own claim that 50% of all Palestinians killed in Gaza during the past week were killed while sleeping in tents.
So it's clearly aiming to draw a kind of moral equivalence there, or maybe even suggest an inversion of victimhood.
Feels like it.
Absolutely. The whole rhetoric seems designed to strip away any sympathy for Israeli suffering by portraying it as, either a mirror image of Palestinian suffering or even less significant in their view.
Leveraging that emotional framework again.
Exactly, the one established right at the beginning.
Okay, moving on. The source then draws a really stark contrast between the different groups involved, specifically their military capabilities and intentions.
Right, comparing the Palestinian resistance and Iran.
How does it describe them?
It contrasts what it calls the light weapons and homemade rockets of the Palestinian groups with the Iranian military.
And how is Iran's military portrayed?
As being armed with some of the most lethal missiles available on the planet. So a huge step up in terms of perceived military power.
A very different kind of threat, according to this source.
Definitely. And then it makes a key distinction about intent.
Regarding civilians.
Yes. According to the source, unlike Israel, Iran is not deliberately targeting civilians.
That's a major claim about targeting policy.
It is. And it goes further, asserting that even the Israeli military acknowledges this to be true, claiming the IDF stated 90% of Iran's missiles are fired at Israeli military sites.
That's a very specific claim about Israeli acknowledgement, aiming to differentiate Iran's actions as presented by this source.
Precisely. It attempts to paint Iran's actions in a more legitimate, or at least militarily focused, light compared to how it portrays Israel's actions.
Shifting gears a bit, the source then makes this really sweeping statement. Every Zionist accusation is a confession of wrongdoing.
That's a strong rhetorical device. How does it illustrate that?
It alleges Israel falsely accused Hamas of hiding beneath hospitals in Gaza, but then claims Israeli soldiers are actually constructing a new military command base underneath Tel Aviv's Ichilov hospital.
So turning the accusation back around.
Exactly. Projecting the alleged wrongdoing onto the accuser.
It's quite a picture the source is taking overall, isn't it? This narrative continues with claims about Israeli vulnerabilities.
Like running out of missiles.
Yes. The video claims Israel is running out of interceptor missiles for its Iron Dome air defense system.
And that this is causing concern elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. It says this led U.S. officials to worry about draining the U.S. global missile stockpile to a horrendous level. It's clearly designed to depict a state under immense strain, potentially nearing a breaking point.
Absolutely. And then the source adds another layer to this picture of vulnerability claims about the Israeli public's reaction.
The idea of people fleeing.
Yeah, it talks about ordinary Israelis fleeing. That's a pretty dramatic image of public panic. What do you think the source is trying to achieve by highlighting these alleged departures and even supposed air travel bans?
Well, it seems intended to show internal collapse, doesn't it? A loss of public confidence, reinforcing that whole idea of a state crumbling from within.
So it claims ordinary Israelis are fleeing the Jewish state in record numbers.
Leading the government to ban air travel, according to the source.
And it even gets more specific, claiming Israelis are paying thousands of dollars to escape Israel by small yachts from the port cities of Haifa and Ashkelon.
Wow, that paints a picture of real desperation, doesn't it? It further undermines that image of Israeli resilience and strength.
It certainly does. So with all these claims, the damage, the alleged deception, the internal issues, the public fleeing, what does this all add up to for the bigger picture, according to this source?
Well, if we try to connect these threads, the source presents a very, very clear thesis about the future of this conflict and the role of international players, particularly the U.S.
What's the prediction?
It suggests there's a greater probability that Israel will carry out a false flag attack,
To achieve what?
specifically to drag the United States into its war.
Ah, okay. And why would Israel need to do that in the source's view?
Because, the video argues, Israel cannot defeat Iran on its own. It claims Israel lacks the capability to hit Iran where it counts deep inside its mountain fortresses,
Yeah.
or to destroy its uranium enrichment sites without U.S. bunker buster bombs.
So it's framing Israel as militarily incapable against Iran without direct U.S. intervention.
Exactly. And it connects this to recent politics, too.
How so?
It mentions Trump's stated position that the U.S. won't get involved unless Iran targets Americans.
Right.
And then it brings up a historical claim to support this idea of Israel trying to draw the U.S. into wars.
What's the historical reference?
It states that Israel bombed a U.S. naval ship, killing 34 American sailors in 1967 in an effort to expand its wars of choice against Arab states that same year, referring to the USS Liberty incident.
Okay, so it's definitely trying to establish a pattern of alleged behavior according to the source's interpretation of history.
Precisely. It's framing the potential for a false flag, not just as a prediction, but as part of a historical tendency, weaving current events into this larger, quite cynical narrative of manipulation.
And how does the source wrap all this up? What's the final sentiment?
It concludes with a really powerful and, again, very emotional statement.
What does this say?
It expresses deep frustration. What frustrates and maddens me the most is the thought of how many lives could have been saved in Gaza had Iran or anyone else hit Israel this hard and much sooner.
So regret that this level of attack didn't happen earlier, linking it directly back to Gaza.
Yes, and it ends on what it calls great news.
Great news.
That Israel is heading towards a shattering defeat because its allies are cutting it adrift and its enemies are growing more emboldened. This final sentence really cements the source's overall narrative arc, inevitable downfall for Israel.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this specific source. Israel hides damage from devastating Iranian missile attacks from the CJ Werleman Show.
We've certainly unpacked a lot.
We have. We've carefully explored the claims, the arguments, the emotional framing presented within this particular source material. We've aimed to uncover its unique and very specific perspective on these events, just reporting impartially on what it argues.
And this source, I think, powerfully illustrates the profound impact narrative construction has, especially in times of conflict. It really prompts you, the listener, to consider how vastly different perspectives shape our understanding of events.
Yeah, what we see as truth or even justice.
Exactly. It shows how sources, particularly those with such intense emotional stances, contribute to the complex, often contradictory tapestry of information around geopolitical events. They actively work to frame an issue in a very particular light.
It's a reminder to be critical.
Definitely. Maybe think about how placing these narratives side by side, this one and others with potentially opposing views, challenges our own perceptions and forces us to critically evaluate the stories we encounter every day. How do you piece together understanding from such different accounts?